Hello everyone! Today, I'd like to go over a budget commander deck that I've built around Shadowfax, Lord of Horses, a Boros commander from The Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. As usual, I've designed this deck to cost less than $45 at the time of recording, using prices listed by Scryfall, including basic lands at 10 cents each, but not including the cost of shipping, taxes, and the like. But let's get into this deck. So, Shadowfax is a 4/4 legendary horse for 3 generic, a red, and a white mana that gives all horses you control haste, including Shadowfax. Additionally, whenever Shadowfax attacks, you may put a creature card with power less than Shadowfax's onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. While the haste is nice, that second ability being able to cheat out a creature with power 3 or less from our hand, without buffing Shadowfax, can really put a lot of work in, and since Shadowfax also gets haste from its first ability, we can attack the turn we cast it and get an extra creature out onto the board. But with that, let's go over the types of cards this deck wants to use to try and pull a victory. As alluded to earlier, this deck will have a lot of creatures with power 3 or less, as without an opponent using -1/-1 counters, Shadowfax should be able to consistently cheat those onto the board when attacking. And since this deck will also want to swing most turns, we'll also look to add some cards that will make our creatures more potent in combat phases, either through power and toughness buffs, or through combat keywords such as trample, first strike, double strike, and the like. And given our commander has a pretty notable casting cost of 5 CMC, and will be risking it most turns by swinging to get its effects, we'll want to have at least a few ways to keep our commander on the board. And finally, since this deck functions best by having at least one creature in hand that can be put onto the battlefield from Shadowfax's ability, we'll include a number of creatures that can double as interaction, protection, or buff our army, rather than having those effects be dominated with enchantments and non-permanent spells. But with that groundwork laid out, let's get into our 99, starting with our ramp. First up, Wayfarer's Bauble and Navigation Orb are land-based ramp, the first tutoring a basic land onto the battlefield tapped, and the latter tutoring 2 basic and/or gate lands which are revealed, one goes onto the battlefield tapped, and the other goes into your hand. Since most gates are dual lands, I have 4 of them that can be tutored here, with Gone Gate making it so that all of our other gates will enter the battlefield untapped, and it taps for the colors that our other gates can produce. And then we have Citadel Gate, Cliff Gate, and Boros Guild Gate, which can be used to tap for Boros colors. Then we have Mindstone and Liquimetal Torque, which tap for generic, while Marble Diamond and Fire Diamond tap for white and red mana respectively. Then Talisman of Conviction, Boros Signet, and Boros Cluestone can be used to tap for Boros colors. And then Felwar Stone is likely to tap for at least one of our colors, while Arcane Signet and Commander Sphere will tap for any color mana we need. And with that, let's move on to the cards that'll make our creatures more potent on the battlefield. Archetype of Courage and Archetype of Aggression are creatures that will give our creatures First Strike and Trample, respectively, while making it so our opponents can't have creatures with those respective keywords. Then, Balefire Liege gives our red creatures +1/+1, our white creatures +1/+1, and it also lets us bonk an opponent for 3 damage when we play a red spell, and lets us gain 3 life when we play a white spell. Nobilis of War is a 3/4 flyer that gives our attacking creatures +2 power. And then Blade Historian and Goring Ceratops gives our creatures double strike when attacking, though Goring Ceratops must be attacking for its ability to spread to the other creatures. Torrid d'Avenant is a 3/3 that gives our other creatures +1/+1 until the end of the turn when it attacks, while giving our other red creatures trample and untapping our other attacking white creatures. Then Felidar Retreat can let us put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control and give them vigilance until the end of the turn whenever we play a land. Or we could choose to make a 2/2 Cat Beast creature token. And for some equipment, we have Haunted Cloak, which grants Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and Loxodon Warhammer, which gives +3 power, Trample, and Lifelink. Trailblazer's Boots and Prowler's Helm will make it very difficult for our opponents to block the equipped creature, and Hexplate Wallbreaker starts off equipped to a 2/2 red Rebel creature token that it creates, but whenever its equipped creature attacks, during our first combat main phase of our turn, we untap our attacking creatures, and we get a second combat phase. And finally, Audric, Lunarch Marshal, makes it so that if any of our creatures have any of a long list of keywords, then at the beginning of each combat, all of our creatures gain those keywords until the end of the turn. Now, I'd like to go over a handful of spells that didn't fit super well into any of the given chapters I have, but can still work well with Shadowfax. First up, we have some Shapeshifters with Mirror Entity, Avian Changeling, and Taurian Mauler, which have Changeling, meaning that they have all creature types, including Horse, so they get haste from Shadowfax. Mirror Entity is especially nice later game as it can give all of our creatures base power and toughness of XX, with X being the mana pumped into that ability. Then we have a couple of actual horses with Chrome Steed and Kelith Sunmane Familiar, with the latter buffing our commander with a +1/+1 counter each time our commander attacks. Tectonic Giant is a great creature to cheat out with Shadowfax, as it'll come in immediately tapped and attacking, and since it's attacking, we can either have it deal 3 damage to each opponent, or give us a smidge of card advantage. And Blessed Sanctuary is an enchantment that makes a 2/2 unicorn creature token whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, while making us and our creatures immune to non-combat sources of damage. And finally, Arni Metalbrow has a similar effect to Shadowfax's second ability, where, whenever a creature we control attacks or enters the battlefield under our control attacking, we can pay a generic and a red to put a creature card with mana value less than the creature that was triggering this ability onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And then that freshly placed creature then re-triggers Arni's ability, provided we have the mana and creatures in hand to do so. But with that, let's go over some spells that we can use to interact with what our opponents are doing. Starting with some creatures with interaction, Radom Unicorn, Philodark Cub, and Kami of Ancient Law are all creatures that can be sacrificed at instant speed to destroy a target enchantment. Then Cathar Commando has Flash, and for 1 mana can be sacrificed to destroy a target artifact or enchantment. And Meteor Golem, while having a fairly high casting cost, can be cheated onto the board with Shadowfax to destroy any target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Then for some non-permanent interaction, we have Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, exiling a target creature, though the former has its controller gain life equal to its power, and the latter lets the controller tutor a basic land onto the battlefield tapped. And Stroke of Midnight destroys a target non-land permanent, but its controller gets a 1/1 human creature token. And Bolt Bend lets us change the target of a target spell or ability. Then finally, in case things get out of hand, we have a couple of board wipes with Austere Command and Cleansing Nova, the former letting you choose 2 of 4 options, destroying all artifacts, all enchantments, all creatures with mana value 3 or less, or all creatures with mana value 4 or greater, and the latter having you choose to either destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. But now that we can interact with our opponent's stuff, let's look at some cards that will make it harder for them to interact with our stuff. Our only non-permanent piece of protection in this deck is Your Temple is Under Attack, an instant with 2 options, either giving our creatures indestructible until the end of the turn, or having us and a target opponent draw 2 cards. Then Frontline Medic gives our creatures indestructible until the end of the turn, provided that it attacks with at least 2 other creatures, which can help to ensure that our creatures make it out of combat alive. It can also be sacrificed to attempt to counter a spell with X in its mana cost. Dauntless Bodyguard has us choose a creature we control when it enters the battlefield, likely our commander, and can be sacrificed to give that chosen creature indestructible until the end of the turn. And more generally, Selfless Savior and Selfless Samurai can be sacrificed to give another target creature we control indestructible until the end of the turn. Loyal Unicorn makes it so, if we control our commander, at the beginning of our combat, we will prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to our creatures that turn, and our other creatures gain vigilance till the end of the turn. Then Bastion Protector will give Shadowfax +2/+2 and indestructible. And finally, Selfless Spirit can be sacrificed to give all of our creatures indestructible until the end of the turn. Now, Shadowfax putting creatures onto the board is likely going to drain our hand pretty fast, so we're going to want to look into a good number of cards that can give us some form of card advantage. First up, we have some equipment with Rogue's Gloves, Mask of Memory, and Zephyr Boots, all of which trigger when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player. Rogue's Gloves simply having you draw a card, Mask of Memory has you draw 2 then discard 1, and Zephyr Boots has you draw and then discard 1, so admittedly it's more for card selection than hand growth. But Zephyr Boots also happens to grant flying, so some evasion along with that card selection. Then we have some artifacts such as Arcane Encyclopedia, Endless Atlas, and Lore Seeker Stone, which can be tapped to draw a given amount. Arcane Encyclopedia is just tap with 3 mana to draw, Endless Atlas costs 2 to draw, but you have to control 3 or more lands with the same name to do so, and Lore Seeker Stone is best for when you're in a pinch, as it costs 3 plus the number of cards in your hand in generic mana to activate, but it lets you draw 3. So it can be great if you have little to no hand remaining, but not so great if you have a couple of cards in hand. With the mana cost, Lore Seeker Stone would probably be among the first draw cards that I'd be looking to upgrade. Mind's Eye lets you pay 1 generic whenever an opponent draws a card to let you draw as well, which, provided you can save a few mana, you're nearly guaranteed to get at least 3 instances of this with a 4-player pod before your next turn. Then Rumor Gatherer has you scry whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, but if it's the second time that this triggers in a given turn, you draw instead. And then subsequent creatures would have you scry again. Mangara, the Diplomat, has you draw if a player swings at you or a planeswalker you control with 2 or more creatures. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell in a given turn, you also draw. And finally, we have Firemane Commando and Mary, Esquire of Rohan, the former having you draw whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, while also letting other players draw if they attack with 2 or more creatures and none of them attack you, so incentive for people not to swing at us. And the latter has you draw if Mary swings with another legendary creature. But now that we have all of our spells on the table, let's go over our lands. First are the previously mentioned Gaunt Gate, Citadel Gate, Cliff Gate, and Boros Guild Gate. Then, since I wasn't happy with the amount of draw we had, we also have Bonder's Enclave, War Room, and Minas Tirith, all of which can be used for mana or to draw, and each with fairly easy requirements to meet in this deck in order to access their draw abilities. Then Naya Panorama, Cabaret Courtyard, Shire Terrace, and Myriad Landscape can all be used to tutor our basic lands onto the battlefield tapped, Myriad Landscape specifically grabbing 2 of the same type of basic land. And then Command Tower will tap for Boros colors and enters the battlefield untapped. And for some dual lands, we have Battlefield Forge, a Pain land, Furycom Snarl, a Reveal land, Temple of Triumph, a Scry land, and Boros Garrison, a Bounce land. And finally, we have Rogue's Passage to make a creature unblockable. And with that, we'll fill the rest of our deck with 11 plains and 7 mountains, as this deck has significantly more white pips than red. But with all 100 cards laid out, let's take a look at that price. And as you can see, at the time of recording, this deck is costing just under $45, which includes our basics at 10 cents each, but it won't include the cost of shipping and potential taxes and the like. But with that, I'd like to go over a handful of upgrades you may wish to consider for this deck. Cards like Chivalric Alliance and Smuggler's Share can be great upgrades for more draw. Virtue of Loyalty will consistently buff our creatures while giving them pseudo-vigilance. Aurelia, the War Leader, will give us extra combat phases to swing Shadowfax with. Ironis, God of Victory, makes it harder for our creatures to be blocked by giving them Menace, while also preventing any combat damage that they would be taking while attacking. And Vexilus Praetor, Crested Sunmare, Mithril Coat, and Darksteel Plate are all solid ways of giving more protection to our commander. But with that being said, if you'd like to play with, adapt, or upgrade this deck, the link, as always, is in the description down below. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like, and if you'd like more budget commander decks, consider dropping a sub. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.